Every place in Japan has an official story. The story on the brochure, in the guidebook, on the museum placard. The reason you are supposed to go there. What you are supposed to feel when you arrive. What you are supposed to take away. And then there is the other story. The one the official version was built partly to replace, or to contain, or to make easier to stand next to without discomfort. In this video, we are looking at 12 Japanese locations famous for the wrong reasons. Not obscure places, not hidden places. Places that millions visit every year, that appear on every Japan travel list, that are almost always described wrong. The thing that made these places what they are is not the thing you are told when you arrive. So hit subscribe, turn on notifications, and let us begin. If you know one thing about Aokigahara, you probably know it is associated with suicide. The association is real, documented, and genuinely tragic. What international coverage almost never mentions is what Aokigahara was before that association, and what role a specific piece of fiction played in creating it. The forest's association with death predates modern statistics. In Japanese folk tradition, Aokigahara was associated with yurei, restless spirits, and with ubasute, the alleged abandonment of elderly relatives during famine. Whether ubasute actually occurred here in significant numbers is historically disputed, but the reputation as a place of death was established long before the 20th century. The modern suicide association was significantly amplified by a 1960 novel, Kuroi Jukai, in which two lovers die in the forest. A 1993 guidebook providing specific directions for suicide in the forest further amplified it. Aokigahara is famous as a suicide forest. It's famous for that reason, partly because a novelist made it famous for that reason. Hashima Island, Gunkanjima, Battleship Island, is one of the most photographed abandoned places on Earth. Its concrete apartment blocks have been featured in films, music videos, architectural publications, and on the UNESCO World Heritage List since 2015. The aesthetic is extraordinary. The story the aesthetic tells is incomplete. Between 1939 and 1945, an estimated 500 Korean and Chinese workers were brought to Hashima under Japan's wartime labor mobilization system. They worked in the undersea coal mine in conditions that documentation suggests were harsher for conscripted laborers than for Japanese counterparts. Deaths occurred. Japan's UNESCO nomination initially framed the island in terms of Meiji-era industrialization, omitting the wartime forced labor history. South Korea protested. Japan eventually agreed to add interpretive materials, acknowledging that some workers were brought against their will. The specific language of that acknowledgement remains diplomatically contested. Hashima is famous as a beautiful ruin. The beautiful ruin was built partly by people who did not choose to be there. The Okinawa Churaumi Aquarium is one of the largest and most visited aquariums in the world. Its whale shark tank draws visitors from across Japan and internationally. The aquarium exists within Ocean Expo Park, developed in northern Okinawa, and represents a vision of post-war Okinawa oriented toward natural beauty and tourism. The aquarium exists on an island whose history is defined by a battle that is not over in any political sense. The Battle of Okinawa in 1945 killed approximately a third of the island's civilian population. American military bases have remained on Okinawa since 1945, occupying significant portions of the island's land area, a presence that Okinawan political movements have consistently protested and that Tokyo and Washington have consistently maintained. The whale sharks swim in their tank. Outside the tank, Okinawa continues its long negotiation with what it means to be simultaneously a tourist destination and an island that has not resolved the terms of its own post-war situation. The thousands of vermilion torii gates at Fushimi Inari are among the most replicated images of Japan. The shrine draws millions of visitors annually and appears on virtually every Japan travel list. What the international photography almost never communicates is what the gates were actually built for. Each torii gate was donated by a business or individual petitioning Inari for commercial success. The entire mountain path is a physical ledger of commercial anxiety stretching across generations. Each gate bears the donor's name and date, making the famous tunnel of red and orange a record of people who were afraid they might not prosper. The kitsune, fox spirits associated with Inari, are not simply decorative in Japanese folk tradition. They are tricksters and shapeshifters capable of possession and vengeance. The folk tradition surrounding Inari worship includes significant elements of fear and propitiation. The shrine photographs show you the gates. They do not show you the tradition that built them. In the Chiyoda district of Tokyo, a Shinto shrine commemorates approximately 2.5 million people who died in Japan's military conflicts from the Meiji Restoration through the Second World War. The shrine is visited by millions annually, including, in various years, Japanese prime ministers. A fact that generates sustained diplomatic controversy with China and South Korea. The controversy centers on a decision made by Yasukuni's priests in 1978. The enshrinement of the spirits of 14 individuals, classified as Class A war criminals by the International Military Tribunal, including wartime Prime Minister Tojo Hideki, executed in 1948. Under Yasukuni's Shinto theology, enshrinement means these individuals' spirits are now among those the shrine commemorates. Yasukuni is officially presented as a war memorial, comparable in intent to national memorials in other countries. The 1978 theological decision, made 40 years after the events and 30 years after the executions, transformed what the memorial actually commemorates in ways that the simple description of it as a war memorial does not capture. Roppongi is one of Tokyo's most internationally recognized districts, famous for its nightlife, restaurants, galleries, and the Mori Art Museum. The district's transformation into a high-end residential and commercial area has been presented as a model of urban regeneration. The history of Roppongi's nightlife district is inseparable from Yakuza, involvement in the entertainment economy that built it. From the 1970s onward, organized crime networks maintained significant involvement in clubs, bars, and hostess establishments, involvement that manifested in protection arrangements, direct venue ownership, and the management of women who worked in them. High-profile crimes in the 1980s and 1990s, including Yakuza-connected murders and deaths of foreign nationals, led to sustained police pressure that reduced organized crime's visible presence. Roppongi today is considerably different from the 1980s. The Mori Art Museum is not a Yakuza institution, but the district's transformation was the result of sustained police pressure on an entertainment economy that operated as managed organized crime space for decades. The galleries are new. The history underneath them is not. Nikko Toshogu is among the most elaborately decorated buildings in Japan, drawing millions of visitors to see extraordinary carved and lacquered architecture. The famous three wise monkeys are here. The sleeping cat is here. The 1,000-year Cedar Avenue is among the most atmospheric approaches to any religious site in Japan. What Nikko was built to do was not primarily religious. Toshogu was built to house the deified spirit of Tokugawa Ieyasu, founder of the shogunate that ruled Japan for 268 years. The extraordinary expense and decoration were political calculation. The Tokugawa clan built Nikko to demonstrate that their power was not merely political, but cosmic, that no rival could match a ruling dynasty capable of building this. Built between 1634 and 1636, using over 15,000 artisans in under 2 years, the speed and expense were both features. The message was the money. Nikko is famous as a beautiful shrine. The beauty was engineered as a political statement so successful it outlasted its dynasty by 3.5 centuries. The Shiratoko Peninsula at the northeastern tip of Hokkaido is a UNESCO World Heritage Site designated for its extraordinary biodiversity, its brown bear population, and its drift ice. Shiratoko is presented as a place of pure nature, Japan at its most remote and most wild. The peninsula sits at the edge of an unresolved territorial dispute that has prevented Japan and Russia from signing a formal peace treaty for 8 decades. In the final days of the Pacific War and weeks following Japan's surrender, Soviet forces moved through the northern islands and Shiratoko region, taking Japanese military and civilian prisoners transported to Siberian labor camps. Soviet military occupation of the 4 islands north of Hokkaido has created a dispute that remains active today. The drift ice that makes Shiratoko's winter landscape visually extraordinary comes from the same waters that surround the contested islands. The peninsula's position as Japan's closest point to Russian-administered territory is not mentioned in the natural heritage framing. The Nachi waterfall is the tallest in Japan, dropping 133 meters. The Kumano Nachi Taisha Shrine Complex is one of the most significant sites in the UNESCO-designated Kumano Kodo Pilgrimage Network. The image of the orange shrine pagoda, beside the white column of falling water, is among the most reproduced images of Japanese religious architecture. What the tourism framing does not fully communicate is what the Kumano pilgrimage was understood to be. For medieval Japanese pilgrims, the journey to Kumano was not simply a visit to sacred sites. It was a symbolic journey through death and rebirth. Pilgrims were understood to be ritually dying as they moved through the network. The Nachi waterfall, as the most dramatic natural feature in the network, was a focal point for associations with death, purification, and supernatural power. The waterfall is presented today as beautiful natural scenery within a heritage site. The specific death and rebirth associations that made it sacred are not part of how millions of tourists are told to see it. The Hiroshima Peace Memorial Park and Museum is among the most significant memorial institutions in the world. The museum is honest about what the atomic bomb did to human bodies. Its mission is explicit: to advocate for a world without nuclear weapons. What the museum's framing does not fully address is why Hiroshima specifically was targeted. Hiroshima in August 1945 was not a purely civilian city. It was the location of the Second Army Headquarters, the military command responsible for the defense of southern Japan against the anticipated American invasion. The decision to drop the first bomb on Hiroshima, rather than a purely industrial or purely military target, is presented as context for the tragedy, without examining the military logic that shaped it. The complexity of why Hiroshima specifically was chosen, the military significance that made it a target, is a question the peaceful framing of the memorial makes difficult to fully examine. The Upapoi National Ainu Museum, opened in 2020, is the first national-level museum dedicated to Ainu culture. It is architecturally striking, substantively resourced, and represents genuine institutional commitment to preserving Ainu cultural heritage. The Ainu were recognized as an indigenous people of Japan by national law in 2019. This recognition came 150 years after the Meiji government began systematic policies of dispossession, forced assimilation, and cultural suppression. Confiscation of Ainu land without compensation, prohibition of the Ainu language in schools, forced adoption of Japanese names, prohibition of traditional hunting and fishing practices, and display of Ainu human remains in university collections for decades. The Upapoi Museum is presented as a celebration of Ainu culture. It is also, unavoidably, a monument to what was done to Ainu culture in the 150 years before the museum was built. The exhibits documenting traditional practices are exhibits of practices that were systematically suppressed by the government that now funds the museum commemorating them. Inside Yasukuni Shrine's grounds stands the Yushukan, a museum presenting Japan's 20th century military history in a specific narrative framework. Japan's actions in Asia as liberation from Western colonialism, the attack on Pearl Harbor as a defensive response to American economic pressure, the wartime leadership as patriots deserving honor. The Yushukan is not a fringe institution. It is physically located within Yasukuni Shrine, visited annually by prime ministers, cabinet ministers, and hundreds of thousands of ordinary Japanese citizens. The historical interpretation it presents is available in a beautifully produced permanent exhibition to everyone who enters. Yasukuni is famous as a controversial war memorial. What it is most famous for in diplomatic terms is the Yushukan and the specific interpretation of 20th century history it presents to millions of visitors every year. The shrine commemorates the dead. The museum explains why they died in terms that the governments of China, South Korea, and the United States have formally protested.